He built an empire on pills and promises, but the woman he once abandoned is about to become the price he never expected to pay. What happens when a past you thought was buried crashes your champagne toast? Ethan Cole stood on the deck of the luxurious riverboat, his glass raised high, his smile sharp and easy. The lights of the city glimmered on the water, and around him, laughter echoed, old classmates, new colleagues, executives from the pharmacy chain he had spent the last 10 years building. This banquet was the culmination of a dream, the grand opening of Colwell Pharmaceuticals in its newest region. "It's good to see success looks as good on you as ambition did back in college," someone said behind him. He turned to see Caleb, an old classmate, holding a flute of champagne and wearing a smirk that hadn't aged since freshman year. "You always said you'd get rich or die trying. Looks like you skipped the dying part." Ethan laughed politely, brushing off the compliment. Caleb leaned in, voice lower now. "So, is she coming tonight?" Ethan stiffened. "Who?" "You know who. The one you were gonna marry before grad school turned your head." A flicker of something unreadable passed across Ethan's face. He took a long sip of champagne. "There are no women on the guest list. This is a business event." Caleb raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Ethan walked away before the conversation could dig any deeper. At home, the tension hadn't gone unnoticed. Ethan's wife, Margaret, was helping him go over final details for the banquet. She was calm, refined, and composed, exactly the kind of woman one would expect beside a man like Ethan. 10 years his senior, Margaret came from a dynasty of pharmaceutical magnates but had chosen the humble route of research and patient advocacy. Their marriage was practical, stable, respectable, but never passionate. Margaret flipped through the seating chart and paused. "Isn't Jessica Bennett from your undergrad class?" Ethan looked up slowly. "Yes." "Why?" "She's not on the list. I just remember you used to talk about her, a lot." "She wouldn't be interested. Besides, it's not appropriate to mix old flings into business celebrations." Margaret offered a tight smile and returned to her notes, but her eyes lingered on her husband a little longer than usual. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office after Margaret went to bed. He scrolled through an old university group chat he hadn't touched in years, pausing at a name, Jessica Bennett. Her profile photo was dimly lit, just a hint of her smile and hair swept back by the wind. He hesitated for a moment. Then he clicked. A message window opened. He didn't write anything. He just stared. The riverboat glittered like a floating jewel, anchored along the marina as guests climbed aboard in designer suits and evening gowns. Inside, chandeliers sparkled, jazz spilled from a live quartet, and servers moved like shadows with flutes of Dom Perignon. Ethan stood near the entrance, his hand gently on Margaret's back, smiling at each new arrival. No one noticed how he kept glancing toward the dock. Then she appeared. Jessica Bennett. Not on any list, not officially invited, but present all the same. She walked up the gangway in a midnight blue dress that shimmered like the water around them. Her hair was pinned up carelessly, like she hadn't tried, but somehow looked breathtaking anyway. Every man turned. A few whispered. And one, the man who used to love her, looked away so fast it was almost painful. Margaret caught the shift in him immediately. "Who's that?" she asked coolly. Ethan didn't answer right away. "Just someone from college," he muttered. "I didn't think she'd show." Margaret didn't press. She didn't need to. Her silence was loaded. Jessica didn't approach Ethan that night, not at first. She laughed with other classmates, charmed some of the executives, and made every man forget their wives for a moment too long. Ethan remained glued to Margaret's side, all smiles and politeness, but his eyes rarely left Jessica. At dinner, Jessica was seated across the room. Not close, not far. Just visible enough to haunt him. During the speeches, Ethan spoke eloquently about the future of medicine, the power of pharmaceuticals, and the chain's mission to do good, live well. Margaret smiled up at him, proud, even if a little wary. The applause was warm. The champagne flowed. And yet, as the night wore on, Margaret complained of a migraine and left early with their driver. Ethan promised to follow soon, but as the boat docked for the night, he remained on board. He didn't tell anyone why. Jessica found him first. She was barefoot now, heels dangling from one hand, mascara smudged just slightly. She'd had too much champagne, or maybe just enough. Her voice was thick with emotion. "You really did it," she said, stepping into the moonlight with him. "You built your empire." Ethan didn't look at her. "You shouldn't have come. You didn't invite me." A long silence. "You left me for all this," she said, gesturing vaguely to the riverboat, the skyline, the brand logo on the ice sculpture. "You made a choice." "I made a decision," he replied. "A practical one." "And I was what? Impractical?" Her voice cracked. "You promised me marriage, Ethan. That was a lifetime ago. It still happened." The silence between them was heavier than the water beneath them. Jessica stepped closer. Her perfume was familiar, disarming. Ethan's mask cracked just enough to let something, long buried and dangerous, slip through. "I waited," she whispered. "I waited, Ethan. And you never came back." His voice was hollow. "I thought you'd forget me. God, you're arrogant." And then she kissed him. It wasn't slow or soft or romantic. It was angry and wounded and hungry for closure. Ethan didn't resist. For one moment, he gave in. Ethan didn't sleep that night. After the kiss, he pulled away without a word, turned his back on Jessica, and left the riverboat in silence. But when he climbed into the back of the car beside Margaret, already dozing, her head against the window, he felt something shift irreparably inside him. It wasn't guilt. It was dread. In the days following the banquet, Ethan's demeanor began to unravel. He stopped coming home on time. Claimed late meetings. Switched his phone to silent. When Margaret asked, he said the expansion required more travel, compliance issues, regulatory board visits, supplier negotiations. It sounded plausible. But Margaret had been born into this business. She knew better. She didn't confront him, not at first. Instead, she watched. Waited. And took notes. One evening, she found a receipt tucked inside Ethan's jacket, an expensive restaurant in a part of the city she knew he had no professional reason to be near. The next day, she quietly called her doctor. Stress and insomnia had made her migraines unbearable again. "I think I need something stronger," she told him. They prescribed a treatment plan, daily injections of a new neuroregulator that had recently hit the market. It wasn't FDA approved yet, but Ethan insisted it was safe. He took personal charge of administering the drug. "You'll feel like yourself again," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And at first, he was right. The results were almost euphoric. Within 24 hours, Margaret felt lighter than she had in years. Her thoughts were sharp, her body full of energy. She danced alone in the kitchen, laughed to herself, reorganized the entire pantry at 3 a.m. It was like someone had turned the brightness back up on her life. "I feel incredible," she told Ethan. He kissed her forehead and said, "It's working. I told you." But within a week, the high began to fade. The second injection brought the joy again, but when it wore off, the crash was worse. She couldn't move without trembling. Her hands shook when she held a spoon. Her mouth was dry. Her chest ached. It was like her body was punishing her for feeling good. She begged Ethan for the next dose. And he gave it, without hesitation. Margaret didn't see it at first. Didn't see the trap she was in. Because at that point, she trusted her husband more than her instincts. But the cracks were beginning to show, and the woman Margaret used to be, the one raised by pharmaceutical barons and trained to spot manipulation in fine print, was starting to claw her way back to the surface. She just needed to survive long enough to see the truth. The third injection didn't bring relief, it brought dependence. Margaret's hands twitched as she clutched the bathroom counter, staring at her reflection. Her skin looked too pale. Her pupils were too large. Her heartbeat rattled in her ears like a warning bell, and no amount of water or rest could silence it. She whispered to herself, "Something's wrong." But when she asked Ethan what was in the ampoules he injected, his answer was clinical, distant. "It's just a neuroadaptive stimulant. Perfectly safe. I've reviewed the compound myself." Her chest tightened. "Then why do I feel like I'm dying when it wears off?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Because your body is healing. It's part of the process." But Margaret wasn't a fool. She'd grown up in boardrooms, sitting through pharmacological trials and regulatory meetings since she was 12. Her mother once ran a biotech firm that went under because they buried side effects. Margaret had watched how easily science turned into secrecy. And this, whatever Ethan was giving her, was no standard treatment. By the fourth dose, the desperation took over. She could barely walk by the time she stumbled to Ethan's office, pleading. "Please. I need it. I can't function without it." He didn't smile. He didn't argue. He simply opened a drawer, pulled out a single ampoule, and held it up like it was gold. "Only if you promise to calm down," he said. Margaret paused. Something about his tone felt wrong. But her body was collapsing under withdrawal. She nodded. He injected it into her shoulder. The relief was immediate and terrifying. Within minutes, she was dancing to music that wasn't playing. Laughing too loud. Calling old friends and gushing about how clear everything felt. But that night, when the effects wore off again, she collapsed. And this time, something else collapsed with her, her trust. In the middle of the night, Margaret crept into Ethan's study. She found the ampoules hidden beneath a false panel in the liquor cabinet, each labeled only with a number, no brand, no dosage information, no regulatory stamp. A chill ran down her spine. She took two. Hid them in a jewelry box. Then she picked up her phone. She called her old friend and physician, Dr. Emerson, from her childhood town. A man she trusted with her life. A man who once told her, "If you ever feel like you're being controlled, come to me." "I need help," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I'm coming," he replied. "But you need to leave. Now." The next morning, Margaret was gone. Ethan searched every room, but she had vanished, along with two ampoules and her wedding ring. The small house sat at the edge of an overgrown meadow, its shutters sun-bleached, its roof patched with care. Dr. Emerson hadn't lived in the village for decades, but when he retired, he returned here, alone, quiet, withdrawn. Locals called him the Hermit Doc, but they still came to him when desperate. And now, Margaret Cole stood trembling at his door, clutching a leather tote and a heart full of fear. He opened the door without a word, ushered her inside, and locked it behind them. "I need to know what's in these," she said, placing the ampoules on the table. Dr. Emerson didn't answer. He simply took out gloves, a sterile tray, and his tools. It wasn't until hours later, after analyzing one of the ampoules with a makeshift testing kit, that he finally spoke. "You're not on a regulated medication," he said quietly. "This isn't treatment. It's a designer stimulant. Potent, fast-acting, highly addictive. Not legal." Margaret didn't move. "My husband gave it to me. Said it was for my migraines." "It's synthetic dopamine analogs, Margaret. He didn't give you medicine. He gave you a leash." She stared at the wooden floor, breath shallow. Dr. Emerson leaned forward. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." For days, Margaret stayed with him, no phones, no mirrors, no noise. Just raw detox, sweats, vomiting, tremors, insomnia. It was a private hell. Dr. Emerson monitored her like the patients he'd once treated in rehab clinics. He gave her real medication, pain relief, mood stabilizers, and a journal. "Write everything," he said. What he did, what you felt, what you remember. It's evidence now. On the 5th day, Margaret awoke to sunlight and silence. The cravings had dulled. Her mind was beginning to clear. She sat at the table, flipping through her own notes. What had begun as desperation now looked like a case file. Patterns. Timelines. Receipts. And the ampoules, carefully stored and labeled, were now part of something much bigger. Meanwhile, Ethan was spiraling. Margaret's sudden disappearance had thrown his life into chaos. He tried to keep up appearances, meetings, press calls, investor lunches, but his mind was unraveling. His affair with Jessica was no longer a secret. He'd put her in an apartment, covered her rent, showered her with designer gifts. She liked him best when he was spending. But now, Jessica was calling him non-stop. "Where is she?" she whispered. "You said you'd take care of this." "She's gone," he snapped. "But I'll fix it." "Fix it?" she hissed. "You told me she'd be too sick to fight back." Ethan hung up without answering. That week, he contacted a local notary, pushing to draft a will, declare Margaret mentally unfit, and transfer power of attorney. But the notary, a cautious man, hesitated. "Her appearance doesn't match what you're claiming," he said. "You'll need a psychiatric witness." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then I'll find one." He drove to the countryside. Paid a stranger to give him the name of a doctor who lived off-grid and didn't ask questions. Dr. Emerson. The knock on Dr. Emerson's door came mid-morning, sharp and insistent. Margaret was in the back room when she heard it, her breath freezing in her chest. She peeked through the curtains and saw him, Ethan. Dressed too cleanly for this part of the world, trying too hard to look casual. Dr. Emerson opened the door without fear. "Can I help you?" he asked. Ethan offered his best rehearsed smile. "I'm looking for someone. A friend of my wife said she might have come through here. She's unwell. I'm worried." "Your wife have a name?" "Margaret Cole." Emerson didn't blink. "Never heard of her." "I was told you're a psychiatrist. You can evaluate her mental state." "I stopped evaluating people a long time ago," he said. "Lost someone. Vowed never to write another report again." Ethan pressed forward. "I'm trying to help her. She's not herself. I have paperwork. A notary ready to file if." "I don't care what you have," Emerson said flatly. "And if she had been here, which she hasn't, I'd say what she needs most is to get far away from you." Their eyes locked, and something cold passed between them. Ethan's voice dropped. "You don't know what's going on." "I know exactly what's going on," Emerson replied, then slowly, calmly, shut the door. Inside, Margaret exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "Do you think he suspects?" Emerson looked over at her. "He doesn't suspect. He knows. But now he also knows he can't touch you here." She sat down slowly, her legs still unsteady. "What happens now?" "We gather proof," Emerson said. "And we make sure when he falls, he doesn't get up again." That night, Emerson sent a message to an old contact, an investigative journalist who had once exposed corruption in a biotech scandal. He offered ampoules, medical reports, and patient testimony. "This story has everything," the message read. "Greed, addiction, power. And a victim ready to speak." The journalist replied within hours, "I'm listening." Ethan, meanwhile, returned to the city fuming. Jessica was waiting in his penthouse, draped in silk sheets and half a bottle of wine in. "Where have you been?" she pouted. "Out fixing things." "Well, fix faster. My rent's due, and your wife's bank account isn't wired to my lifestyle." Ethan poured a drink, ignoring her. He stared at the skyline, eyes distant. "I'm losing control," he murmured. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Then take it back." But Ethan was already making other plans. Margaret stood in front of the mirror at Dr. Emerson's, her reflection no longer hollow. Her skin had color again. Her hands had stopped shaking. The haze of chemical dependence had lifted. But what replaced it wasn't relief, it was purpose. "This isn't just about saving myself," she told Emerson. "It's about stopping him before he does this to someone else." Emerson nodded. "Then we go public." The plan was meticulous. Margaret wrote a full account of her experience, from the first injection to the spiral into addiction, to Ethan's sudden coldness, his affair, and his push to claim her fortune. Emerson supplied chemical analyses of the ampoules, proof they were not medical treatment but a synthetic stimulant engineered for dependency. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Kara Doyle, drove up to the cottage with a portable camera crew. She'd once exposed a pharmaceutical firm's role in a wave of rural overdoses. Now, she wanted this story. Badly. They recorded the interview in a sunlit room with books and plants and Margaret's voice steady and calm. "He told me it was medicine," she said. "But it was poison designed to make me dependent on him." Kara asked gently, "Why do you think he did it?" Margaret's eyes flickered. "Because he couldn't control me anymore." Meanwhile, Emerson dug deeper. He found suppliers. Traced purchase records. Ethan hadn't covered his tracks well enough. There were offshore shell accounts. Private orders of pharmaceutical precursors. One distributor even remembered the name Colwell. One of their execs bought a batch for a trial. Within a week, they had everything. Emails. Bank transfers. Sample vials. Margaret's blood work. A former lab assistant anonymously confirmed, Ethan had developed the compound in a private facility under the guise of hormonal pain therapy. "It was always about power," she said. Back in the city, Ethan was preparing to strike first. He returned to the notary with falsified documentation, an affidavit signed by a shady local claiming Margaret was paranoid and hallucinating. He scheduled an appointment to file incompetency papers the following week. "She's not well," he repeated like a mantra. "I'm trying to protect her assets." But that week, just days before he could finalize the paperwork, something dropped. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a letter. It was a broadcast. "Coming up tonight," the anchor's voice echoed. An exclusive investigation into a pharmaceutical executive accused of drugging his own wife with unapproved substances. Evidence, testimony, and a story that could shake the industry. Ethan froze in front of the TV. Jessica dropped her wineglass. His phone started vibrating non-stop. He didn't answer. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The moment the news broke, his phone transformed into a grenade. Investors, board members, attorneys, everyone was calling, texting, demanding explanations. The headline on every major outlet was the same. Pharma exec accused of drugging wife with synthetic substance, exclusive interview with Margaret Cole exposes shocking abuse within Colwell Pharmaceuticals. The footage was damning. Margaret's face, serene and clear-eyed, speaking softly about dependency, control, and betrayal. Dr. Emerson explaining the molecular structure of the drug. Kara Doyle reading from email threads and bank transfers. It wasn't a news story. It was an indictment. And Ethan knew, they had him. By morning, the fallout began. The Colwell board called an emergency meeting. Their statement to the press was sterile and predictable: internal review, allegations taken seriously, executive placed on indefinite leave. But behind closed doors, they were already scrubbing his name from the website. Jessica packed up her things without saying goodbye. Her last text was 2 words. "We're done." Margaret, meanwhile, was untouchable. Emerson had transferred the ampoules to legal custody. The case was with the district attorney now. Margaret had retained a lawyer who specialized in medical abuse. She gave one interview, then vanished again, back to the village, back to her recovery. But the media wouldn't let go. Articles flooded the internet. Wife of pharma exec breaks silence on covert drug use. From banquet to breakdown, the rise and fall of Ethan Cole. A designer drug meant to control, the new weapon of domestic power? Hashtags trended. Think pieces were written. Colwell's stock plummeted. Ethan tried to hold on. He called a crisis PR firm. He called his father-in-law, Margaret's estranged stepfather, hoping for a lifeline. He even tried to contact Margaret. The call never went through. Instead, he received a formal letter from her attorney, a divorce filing, and a list of frozen assets pending investigation. She wanted everything she was entitled to, and more. In the penthouse, Ethan sat alone, surrounded by unopened mail and shattered glass. The riverboat photo from the banquet sat face down on his desk. In the corner, a box of ampoules still remained, his last hidden stash. He picked one up. Stared at it. Then slowly, deliberately, dropped it in the trash. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, Ethan Cole stood in a courtroom, his suit a size too large, his face drawn and colorless. He didn't speak. His lawyer did most of the talking, pleading temporary insanity, emotional duress, and misguided pharmaceutical innovation. But the evidence spoke louder. The judge, stern, female, and famously intolerant of pharmaceutical misconduct, denied bail. Ethan was remanded for further investigation. Behind him, no one sat in the gallery. Jessica was gone. His colleagues had vanished. Margaret had not even bothered to attend. Meanwhile, in a quiet cottage nestled between trees and memory, Margaret watched the news on a small tablet. Dr. Emerson handed her a cup of tea, and she took it without speaking. "You don't have to watch this," he said gently. "I do," she replied. "Not for him. For me. I need to see how this ends." But what she saw wasn't revenge. It was closure. A week later, the court approved a full forensic audit of Colwell's operations. Investigators uncovered falsified clinical data, internal memos warning of addiction risks, and private emails between Ethan and lab technicians urging them to ignore mild withdrawal effects for now. Civil suits followed. Class action. Margaret's own lawsuit, supported by medical documentation, expert testimony, and her televised interview, was the first to be filed. Others followed. Former employees, even anonymous whistleblowers. What had once been Ethan Cole's empire was now a headline in business ethics textbooks. As for Margaret, she did not stay hidden forever. With Emerson's encouragement, she applied for a grant to open a non-profit art therapy program for recovering addicts. Her proposal? A healing studio. Clay, paint, music, and silence, for those who'd been manipulated by someone they trusted. She called it restoration. Emerson, once retired, returned to work part-time. "Just until the first season's done," he said. But Margaret knew. He wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for redemption. One afternoon, standing in a sunlit studio filled with brushstrokes and soft piano music, Margaret received a final envelope. From the courts. Her divorce had been finalized. Her estate was safe. Her name, legally and symbolically, was her own again. The opening night of restoration was nothing like a gala. There were no champagne flutes or flashing cameras. No speeches. No applause. Just soft light. Canvases. Clay drying on shelves. Laughter coming from people who had forgotten how. Margaret stood in the center of it all, her hands covered in paint. She wore jeans and a linen blouse. Simple. Free. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, her smile easy. The woman who had once walked through life with polished heels and polite silence now moved like someone who had nothing left to prove. Because she didn't. Former patients arrived slowly at first. Then more came. Men and women who had once been dependent on pills, on people, on systems that fed their weakness. Margaret never asked what they'd been through. She just handed them a brush and said, "Paint what it feels like to start again." One evening, as she locked up the studio, Dr. Emerson approached her with a folded newspaper under his arm. "They accepted the plea deal," he said. 5 years minimum, pending further charges. civil suits still stacking. Margaret didn't flinch. Good. You want to frame this? He teased, tapping the front page. The headline read, Colwell found her sentenced in pharmaceutical abuse case. She took her power back. She smiled softly. No need. I already lived it. That winter, snow dusted the roof of the studio. Margaret spent her evenings sketching alone, sipping tea, listening to old records. She didn't date. Didn't rush. She was relearning how to love herself. But in the spring, Dr. Emerson asked her something unexpected. I'm going back, he said one morning, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Not to private practice. To the clinic. To treat addicts again. Margaret raised a brow. Thought you swore you were done. I was, he said. But helping you reminded me of what I was supposed to do. I want to make that my ending, not the one I ran from. She looked at him carefully. Then do it. And don't look back. He hesitated. Come with me. She froze, surprised. You don't have to work, he added quickly. Just, come. Start fresh. Build something else. Margaret didn't answer right away. But later that night, she stepped outside, the cold biting at her skin, and looked up at the stars. She thought about the girl she used to be. The one who said yes to a man who promised her forever, then sold her peace for profit. She thought about the woman she became, the one who nearly lost herself for good. And then she thought about the version of herself that stood here now. Stronger. Wiser. Alive. Ethan Cole never returned to the pharmaceutical world. His fortune was gone, liquidated to settle lawsuits, fines, and alimony. Colwell was sold to another conglomerate, its name quietly phased out. Jessica disappeared into obscurity. And Margaret? Margaret drove west with Emerson that spring. They opened a second restoration in a sleepy coastal town. The students were different, but the mission remained the same. To rebuild. To reclaim. To begin again. And Margaret, once a woman almost lost, stood at the center of it all, alive, free, and finally, deeply loved.